You smell that?
Nature's most powerful aphrodisiac.
Leaving right after this drink. Rock and roll, whiskey, and other stories. With your host, Brian Shaw.
Cheers. And welcome to what I believe is episode 7 of I'm Leaving Right After This Drink, Rock and Roll, Whiskey, and Other Stories. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube or whatever, or my website, whatever that may be, and you're wondering, why the hell do you have a green Ibanez guitar in your hand and you're not playing it? Well, let me explain. First of all, my amp's not really hooked up directly like through the phone, so it would sound decent if I actually hit even like a power chord or something. So I figured, you know what, why make your ears bleed? And I'll just hold on to the guitar because this guitar has a lot of meaning to me. And it's also part of the story of tonight's episode, which revolves around Steve Vai. But what got me to thinking about the time I met Steve Vai, out of the few times I met him, was the fact that I read online that Eat 'Em and Smile came out 38 years ago today. David Lee Roth's solo record, 38 years ago, not today, but to this week. And I think to myself, man, I was 12 years old, and that album was the life-changing album for me when it comes to music. It's pretty wild, you know, now that I actually sit down and kind of think about it. But hearing Steve Vai play what he was playing on that song, and just everything about that song is just fucking on point. And for those of you who don't know what song it is, let's play a little bit of it right now. This is a public service announcement. YouTube is a bunch of dicks. This is where you were supposed to hear an audio version of Yankee Rose from David Lee Roth's Eat 'Em and Smile. But YouTube wouldn't publish this content until I removed it. Did I mention that YouTube is a bunch of dicks? And now back to our regularly scheduled program. It's just fucking cool, man. And the shit that Steve Vai was doing, you're just like, what? How do you do that on a guitar? Even when I would watch the video on MTV, I'm like, how the fuck does he do that? And I didn't have a guitar at the time, and I was just like, what the fuck? Like, how do you do that? And of course, you're looking at it, and you're going, as you're a 12-year-old, you're like, oh, I can fucking do that. No, you can't. Because you know what? I still can't play it to this day. I still can't play a note, a lick, nothing of that particular song. But yet, that album was life-changing for me. And, you know, it's the reason it got me into playing guitar. The whole deal, man. It's like Steve Vai is the guy. He was the man to me at that time for playing guitar. And it's like, you know, for a lot of people, they'll tell you about their favorite guitarist or whatever, and they'll tell you Eddie Van Halen, Jimi Hendrix, Randy Rhoads, you know, whatever. For me, it was Steve Vai. Steve Vai and Zakk Wylde were it for me, man. And of course, I'm certainly not, you know, dissing Eddie or Jimmy or any of those guys, but it just not the same to me, man, because Steve's the guy that I saw doing this crazy shit, and I absolutely loved it. Now, again, Eat 'Em and Smile, one of those albums where you're just like, at the time for me, I was like, it's okay. Yankee Rose, that's the shit, man. That is the coolest song. And I still love listening to it to this day. And, you know, again, when we think about leaving Van Halen or being ousted from Van Halen, and you no longer have Michael Anthony and Eddie and Alex Van Halen, now you have Billy Sheehan, Steve Vai, and Gregg Bissonette. Not too shabby to come back on your solo attempt to you know, combat you leaving or getting ousted from Van Halen. But you know, this record was so cool, and I can even remember being like in like a discount store of some sort back in Illinois when I was a little kid and taking my allowance money, and I bought an album. I bought the Eat 'Em and Smile album. I remember getting it home, and it was in Spanish. What? At the time, I didn't even know they made a fucking rock record like that in Spanish. And I'm like, what the shit? What? And I can remember, I think my oldest brother was like making fun of me, like, what an idiot. How did you not know it was in Spanish? I'm like, I don't fucking know. And, but, you know, I remember I was just like, I was pissed. My allowance money was out the window, and I was like, whatever. But let's fast forward many years later, and I'm working at the radio station in Roanoke, Virginia, 96.3 WROV. And I had a new music show from midnight to 1, and I got to play anything I wanted in that show. And I was extremely lucky to be able to do whatever I wanted in that hour. I could interview people. I could, you know, play whatever I wanted. I could give away shit. Like it was great. And it was a fun time. And it was pretty unheard of then, and it's definitely, very unheard of now when it comes to what's being played on the radio. But at the time, I was playing some new bands in that show, and one of those bands was a band called Hair of the Dog, and got to be friends with those guys over the years. And after playing their music and things like that, and then another band that was managed by the same person was the band Lit, and I happened to call their management company when I saw this band Lit come across my desk, because they were managed by the same people as Hair of the Dog. And I was like, I like this record. And it was off Lit's first album, Tripping the Light Fantastic, which led me to go, oh, wow, they're managed by the same person as Hair of the Dog is. So let me just call them and see if I can set up a couple interviews and whatever. And as we're talking, I asked their manager, her name was Ruta, and I asked her, I said, hey, who else is on your roster? And she tells me a couple other people, and one of those other people happens to be Steve Vai. And I'm like, are you kidding? So I was like, is there any way that we can set up an interview, with Steve? And at the time, this was probably 1997. So I think the Mary Xmas record had just came out. And so I was like, look, I'd love to talk to him about that record and whatever. And she's like, yeah, we can absolutely get that going. And she's like, tell me the phone number of what he should call. Give me the hotline number. And I'm like, hotline? Let me tell you a little bit about our station. We are a double-wide trailer in the hood with no locks on the doors. There's no hotline at this radio station. But I promise, if he calls the request line, I'll answer the phone and we'll get him on the air, which is exactly what happened probably, a week or so later. And I can remember having this list of questions and nervous energy like crazy, man, because I'm like, dude, I'm interviewing Steve fucking Vai. And at this point, I had probably, interviewed a few bigger artists, but it was mostly a lot of, baby bands and things like that. So I can just remember being like, oh my God, I'm interviewing Steve Vai tonight. Like, this is insane. And so, Steve calls up, and if you can imagine going through the request lines, like, hey, RV, hi, RV. And it's like, hey, will you play Skinner? Hey, will you play this? And then you're like, hey, this is Steve Vai. And you're like, hang on, man. And so we get Steve on the phone, and and we're talking before the interview off the air, and I'm kind of giving him the rundown of what's going on and what we're going to do on the show. We're going to play a bunch of music from the Mary Xmas record, and we're going to talk in between, whatever. And he's like, cool, like no big deal. And I can remember still telling him, even off the air, like, dude, you're the reason that I ever picked up a guitar, was because of hearing Yankee Rose and being so excited. And I was just like this little kid, And so it's time to go live on the air with him, and we're coming out of his song on the Mary Xmas record, and I pot him up, and I'm like, man, I'm so excited to tell you guys that right now on the phone we have got the legendary Steve Vai. Oh my God! And he's like, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, Brian, how's it going? And hey, settle down, just relax. And I'm like, no, dude, like, you're the guy. Like, this is fucking unbelievable, man. And, we ended up having an awesome interview, and we talked for about an hour. We played a bunch of different songs from the Mary Xmas record at the time. And, even off the air, man, we had some great conversations, just talking. And I will say this, man, that Steve Vai is one of the nicest dudes in the business. He was always very kind to me, no matter how many times I met him, no matter what the circumstances were. Always super cool and such a nice guy. And I know I've said that probably about a bunch of different people that I've spoken to or met with, but Steve, definitely, man, class act all the way. And interviewed him at, that year, the following year in 98. Mary Xmas 2 comes out. Was lucky enough to get him on the phone again and did the same kind of thing. So that was awesome. And I can remember in these interviews, I would always tell him, I'm like, Steve, you're the reason that I picked up a guitar, man. Seeing you play Yankee Rose was the shit. And I remember one time he told me, he goes, Brian, if I ever meet you, I'll show you how to play Stairway to Heaven. And I was like, this dude won't even show me his own fucking song. But, but it was really cool, and it was funny, and again, just super laid back, and we had a great time in these interviews. And then in 99, I moved to California. I lost the gig in Roanoke, Virginia, and moved to LA, started an internet radio station. At the time, that was completely unheard of. And I can remember calling up the manager, and going, hey, is there any chance that we can get Steve, again, do another interview with Steve? And, because by now we were on a first name basis. We get Steve on the phone, and and I was like, look, his song, the audience is listening, is gonna be the first song we play on our internet radio station from Passion and Warfare. And she's like, oh, that's really cool, whatever. And she's like, yeah, he's doing press. He's got the new album coming out, Fire Garden, so he's doing a lot of press for that. So yeah, we'll get it set up, and and you can interview him again. I was like, holy shit, man, this is so fucking cool. And a few days later, she's like, hey, you're gonna go to his house and you're going to interview him. And I'm like, what? I'm going to go to his house? You're fucking joking, right? Look, that's fucking crazy. And so it was set up, and I can remember me and a friend of mine going out to his house. I believe they lived in Encino at the time, and driving down the street, and I'm thinking, man, like, I'm expecting like some huge house or whatever. And it was, pretty modest house or whatever, had a lot of land and whatnot. But I remember pulling up to the gate. I'd say a modest house, but you still pulled up to a gate. And I rang the buzzer, and I was probably 20 minutes early. And by 20 minutes, I probably mean 30, because it was LA and LA traffic. And I'm driving from down by the beach up to Hollywood. Like, it was just like, I don't want to be late, and fuck this all up. But instead, I managed to piss the guy off, probably because I showed up so early and he was still doing another interview. And I'm like, he answers the buzzer, and I'm like, hey, Steve, it's Brian Shaw, and I'm here for the interview at 3 o'clock or whatever it was. And he's like, you're early. Still got another 30 minutes on this interview, but come on in. And I'm like, oh my God, way to go, dude. Piss him off right out of the gate, right? So we go inside his house. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, he takes time out of that interview to, sit us down in his living room, and we're sitting like, what the fuck? And, we're sitting there and having a great time. Me and my buddy are just talking, and I'm going, Steve Vai's fucking house. And that's what I mean by great time. Like, I'm so fucking like starstruck because I'm sitting in this dude's house, and I'm like, I'm not supposed to be in this guy's house, right? Like, as a kid, thinking to myself, if I would have ever thought in a million years I would have even met Steve Vai, my 12-year-old self would have been like, yeah, dream the fuck on. And even my 20-something-year-old self was like, what the fuck are you doing in Steve Vai's fucking living room? So anyhow, we're sitting there. I'm just kind of looking around at the decorations and shit. I'm like, man, this is fucking the coolest experience of my fucking life right now. And just grinning from fucking ear to ear. And it makes me laugh and happy just telling the story. It's how good of a memory it was. And, finally it's my turn to go out and interview him. And again, I've got a list of questions to talk to him about, even after interviewing him a couple times. And, we do the interview, and it was just so nice, man. And took some pictures out on his back porch and whatever. And even after the interview, he managed to give me a bottle of his Fire Garden honey, which is, 25 years old now. I have no idea. This shit's probably awful right now, but whatever, man. I still kept it. I still have it. It's awesome. And it's just, again, one of those cool pieces that I've collected, over the years. And the next day, I can remember his manager calling me and telling me that Steve said that your interview yesterday was the best interview he did in 2 days. And I thought to myself, you're just telling me that because you know what a fan I am of his. And she's like, absolutely not. She's like, he loved your interview, he loved your questions, and I can remember telling her, I was like, man, I didn't even really want to talk about Frank Zappa. And she's like, he loves talking about Frank. And I was just so stoked to hear that. And because for me, interviewing somebody wasn't just trying to figure out, like, back then it wasn't about having a gotcha moment. And even today, to interview somebody, it's not about having that for me. It's about being a fan, talking to them about music and what they're doing. And, when I interviewed him, it was all about his new album. I really wasn't talking about like his career in general, but I still had some of those questions. And so I asked him because I was a fan, and I knew if I was a fan, that there's other fans that want to hear the same shit or know the same things that I do that never had a chance to ask or whatever. And so I was lucky enough to do that. We talked about Frank Zappa. We talked about his time with Whitesnake. We talked about all kinds of cool shit. The funniest thing is I still have this interview on a digital audio tape and haven't heard it in 25 years. And I would probably laugh at myself on how I sounded if I heard this interview again. I definitely need to try and get this interview out of the archives and put on my website and listen to it, because I'm betting it's probably pretty damn comical to listen to. But anyhow, it was very cool. It was a very special moment, to even hear those words, and her saying that, Steve loved the interview and stuff like that. So that was really cool. And you know what the other cool thing was? And the reason why I have this guitar in my hand regarding the story was because Steve signed this guitar up here on the neck. And yeah, man, it was just like one of the coolest fucking things for him to sign this guitar. This guitar was the first guitar I ever bought with my own money. It's over 30 years old. It still plays amazing. It's got Steve's autograph on it. I fucking love this guitar. Again, it was just the beginning of, my love for the guitar and kind of collecting guitars and, having guitars as a hobby, whatever it is. But it's all because of Steve Vai. And again, Steve, one of the coolest fucking guys I've ever met. And I know I've said that about a lot of people that I've met over the years, but it really is genuine, man. Like, no matter what the circumstances were, he was always super nice. I do have one story where the look of fear on his face was pretty crazy, but yet he was still incredibly nice to me. And I say look of fear because of just the circumstances of what it was. But man, it was pretty damn good. And that'll be another story for another episode of this podcast, because, I like to keep these things under, 20 minutes if I can. We're getting to that point, and I hope you guys enjoyed this story about Steve and what a cool motherfucker he is. And this guitar, it means a lot to me. It's one of my favorites. And I hope you guys, again, enjoyed this story. I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Keep liking and sharing and leaving your comments, man. I appreciate it always. And until next time, cheers.
Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe. You dig?
God bless the internet.